Hey, I'm Jake, and today I'm inking this cloaked figure and also giving you 20 uninterrupted minutes of inspirational quotes and creative motivation for you as an artist. Okay, first I just want to thank the sponsor of this video, svslearn.com. It's a website devoted to making you a professional illustrator, or at least giving you the skills needed to be on that professional level. See, at SVS Learn, they realized that learning illustration doesn't have to be confusing, that there could be a clear path, start to finish. You don't have to go to random YouTube videos and put together your own curriculum. You can follow a 21 course curriculum that takes you everywhere from the basics, here's how you hold a pencil, to here's how you color an illustration, render it out with shadow and light and composition, and make actual portfolio pieces. So go check out svslearn.com. There's a free 2-week trial right now for people who sign up today, and I hope to see you over there. Now, let's get to drawing this. Okay, I want to start off talking about attention, and this first quote comes from Patricia Lockwood. She's an American poet and a novelist, and this is what she said. Your attention is your soul spending itself. And I think about this quote a lot. Your attention, like time, is valuable and it's finite. And I want you to consider these three questions. And these are questions that I try to answer all the time when I am giving my attention to something. If your time is valuable, or if your attention is valuable and finite, here's question number one. What are you giving this precious resource away to? So be aware of what you're giving it away to. Second question, what gets only half your attention that should get all of it? Okay. And lastly, do those things that you're giving your attention to, do they feed your soul or do they destroy it? Okay, just something to think about, something to consider. But I want to point out that when you are enjoying something free, especially online, the commodity that's being exchanged is usually your attention. So make sure that what you're spending it on is worth it. And with that, I just want to say thank you for spending some of your attention on this video that I made for you today. I hope that by the end of watching it, you feel like it was worth it. Okay, the next thing is I want to talk about it's a gentle nudge. And this comes from Cal Newport. He wrote a book called Deep Work, which is about how to make things that are important to you that require very deep attention. And in this book, he said, human beings are at their best when they're immersed deeply in something challenging. And this isn't an indictment. It's just something to think about. If you find yourself stagnating, or if you find yourself backsliding, or if you're in a plateau, perhaps what you need to do is immerse yourself into something that challenges you. Maybe it's something that you want to do, but it scares you, and you avoid it because the chance of failure is high. And if you never do it, then you never fail. And actually, I find myself falling into this pattern from time to time, but from experience, I can tell you that the times I've grown the most, both as an artist and as a person, as a human being, the times I've grown the most is when I take on something that's just outside of my abilities, so that even when I fail, I'm still a better version of myself than I was before I started. So consider this like your gentle nudge to do that thing that scares you, do that thing that will be a challenge, but it will make you a better version of yourself after having done it. That leads me to the next thing. This next part is on experience. This is a quote from Angela Duckworth. She's an American academic and a psychologist, and she wrote a book called Grit, which is it's a really good book. And in that book, she opens it with this. She says, some people get 20 years of experience, while others get 1 year of experience 20 times in a row. Now, I think about that. I've personally been working professionally since 1998. So that's 20 plus years. And I have learned a ton over the years. However, I've also seen my work somewhat stagnate in the past decade. And I feel like I got to a level of proficiency in craft where I could make things happen on a schedule but the huge leaps in ability were few and far apart, not like the leaps in ability I had in my teens and 20s, right? I feel like I've been running on a treadmill, getting a workout, but not really moving anywhere. Now, I've grown a lot in how I manage my time. I've grown a lot in how in my organizational skills. I've grown in how to market myself as an artist and just in how to practice business. But the craft, mastering the craft, has suffered in that process. And so what I've decided to do is take up the practice of Kaizen. Now, this is I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's spelled Kaizen. And this is the Japanese practice of resisting the plateau of arrested development. The literal translation of that is continuous improvement. So one who practices Kaizen isn't satisfied with taking on a new art piece or a project that they've done before, but is consistently putting themselves in uncomfortable situations where they must learn something new in order to get something out of it, or in order to get out of that plateau. Kaizen is, quote, a positive state of mind, not a negative one. It's not looking backward with dissatisfaction. It's looking forward, wanting to grow, unquote. And that's from Hester Lacey, and I pulled that quote from the book Grit as well. So as you are finishing out a year or starting a new year of your career, or as your progression as an artist, it might be a good time to reflect on the last few years of what you've been doing as a creative person and evaluate whether you're getting years of experience or the same experience over and over and over and over again. And for me, one of the things that I did once I reviewed my work is I decided that I needed to learn 3D software and figure out how to incorporate it into my illustration and concept art workflow. As I've dug into it, I've felt like a baby learning this stuff. But each time I sit down with the software, I begin having those wonderful aha moments, those moments I used to have, in my early years, developing years as an artist, where, you finally understand, oh, that's how light and shadow works, or that's how you make a good composition. And makes me excited to level up and kind of fight through this steep learning curve. So consider that, think about it. What are you learning new things, or are you doing the same thing over and over and over again? Leads me to the next one, on loving imperfection, because you might be producing things that aren't perfect, that you aren't initially happy with. This is a quote from Patrick Rothfuss. He's an American author. He does fantasy books. And he says, anyone can love a thing because. That's easy as putting a penny in your pocket. But to love something despite, to know the flaws and love them too, that is rare and pure and perfect. I think about this quote a lot too. And this is the case I actually make for loving the movie Avatar. I know that's kind of a polarizing film. People either love it or hate it. But I love it despite, right? And I think this applies to not just entertainment, but this applies to people in your life. It applies to maybe the town you grew up in or the project you're currently working on. And sometimes I focus too much on why the flaws of a thing make it unsatisfactory. Perhaps seeing those flaws not as imperfections, but as features can make life a little bit more beautiful. So learn how to love the imperfections. This next one's on getting it over with. I came across this quote from actor and director Warren Beatty. It kind of sums up what creating anything hard, like a film or a graphic novel, or maybe you're working on a studio album or a theatrical play, or you're writing a children's book or illustrating a children's book. This is a quote he says. Sums up creating anything hard. It says, I compare making a movie to vomiting. I don't like to vomit. It builds up and it builds up until something happens and I think, maybe I'll just feel better if I throw up. And that's how I make a movie. This is a good reminder that if you're putting off a project because it's too stressful or it's uncomfortable or it's too hard or it's too complicated, but you just got to do it, this is This is your push to just go do it. You'll feel much better when you get into it. Okay. And a lot of these things I'm sharing, these, yes, they're for you, but mostly this is 100% something I need to hear myself, or I need to remind myself. So if you feel called out, that's good, because you'll know we're in the same boat together. Okay. All right. This is on gnarly first drafts. And really quick, just look up this image of an owl that I found on Twitter. This pretty much sums up my experience with creating things. The first draft is always a disheveled mess that can't fly, but it might be able to walk and only looks faintly like an owl. The eyes and beak, they're on point though, and that's enough to carry me through to the second and third drafts and on until it's finished. So if you're working on something, don't get discouraged when the possibilities of an idea materialize into the reality of your execution. It's just a first draft. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to exist. My agent has been, she's been begging me for a year now to make a new website. She wanted just a wall of images that she could show editors and art directors. She didn't want any context as to what the book or the project was that they're from, because apparently editors have a tendency to immediately, like, they'll Google the books that an illustrator has worked on to find out the sales numbers, and then they'll judge that work on the sales, not on the art itself. So I made this new website, and it's just, again, just this wall of images, one after the other, no context. And what was interesting is, as I was putting this website together, I was pulling artwork from the last 10, 12 years, and it does not feel like I've drawn that much or I've created that much. But I guess if you, like, there's just so many images. And I was like, holy cow, this is, it was surprising to me how productive I had been, because I don't know, you only think about the last year's worth of stuff that you've done and not the aggregate of 10 to 12 years, right? But I guess if you do something every day, it just adds up and it adds up. And it reminded me of something Austin Kleon said on his blog once. And he's an artist, poet, writer type of guy. He did a few really popular books. Look him up. You should check them out. But this is what he said. Each day is like a panel in a quilt. Some days are ugly, and some days are raw, and some days are chaotic, and some days are colorful, and some days are orderly. But if you keep adding them up, they turn into something. And I like that. I like that vision of you're not making an individual piece of art. You're making a quilt. All of these pieces of art, these different projects you're working on, they're all part of this bigger tapestry or quilt that is your career. And I'm not trying to get too hung up on any one drawing I'm working on, or even any one project that I'm working on, but more about how do these pieces fit into this massive quilt that I'm making with my work. So that's something to think about. How are the things that you're working on fit into the massive quilt, this big quilt that is your career or your life's work? And think about that moving forward. This next part's on, I'll say everything is important, okay? And it'll make sense in a minute. This is from an interview from Mads Mikkelsen. He's an actor. And this interview was in vulture.com. Good interview. This is a question that he was asked. Is there a life philosophy that you feel has carried you through your career? This is what his response was. My approach to what I do in my job, and it might even be the approach to my life, is that everything I do is the most important thing I do. So whether it's a play or the next film, it is the most important thing. Now, I know it's not going to be the most important thing, and it might not be close to being the best, but I have to make it the most important thing. That means I will be ambitious with my job and not with my career. Now, that's a very big difference, because if I'm ambitious with my career, everything I do now is just stepping stones leading to something, a goal I might never reach. And so everything will be disappointing. But if I make everything important, then eventually it will become a career. Big or small, we don't know, but at least everything was important. Now, that's a mouthful, but the gist of it is you make the thing important, the thing that you're working on important, and it's like that tapestry or that quilt, that patchwork quilt. Every little piece adds up and makes something bigger, and I appreciate this perspective. I do look down the road a lot. I think about the big picture, maybe more than I should. But this approach to make the thing you're doing right now the most important thing, and that those things add up, kind of goes with what I was saying about the patchwork quilt. To look at it another way, you don't run marathons because you like medals. You run marathons because you like running. And it's all about what you're doing in that moment and not so much what the future result of it is. This next thing on where your stories come from. And I come back to this interview with Maurice Sendak. He's being interviewed by Bill Moyers. I come back to it from time to time because it's just so good. One gold nugget from this 40-minute video or this interview that's been posted online is this exchange after they talk about where the wild things are and what a boundary-pushing book it was when it came out. Maurice Sendak being the author, illustrator of maybe one of the greatest children's books in the last 100 years. Moyers asks, what I hear you describing is not a story that you just made up. It's a story you experience. This is him talking about where the wild things are. And Sendak says, yeah, well, that's what art is. I mean, you don't make up stories, you live your life. If you are a storyteller and you're stuck not knowing what story you should tell, maybe it's because you're trying to tell someone else's story. Maybe look at your life and where heartache and triumph have overlapped and tell that story. I don't mean literally, but let that point of friction in your life be a catalyst for what you create. And if you don't have anything, I like what he's saying, if you don't necessarily have anything in your life to pull from, there's no heartache and triumph in your life, then maybe it's time to start living your life, to do those things that put you in positions where you grow and improve. Do those things that challenge you, that take you out of your comfort zone, that you might fail at, so you can have these experiences and these stories to tell your stories from. And that leads me to this next thing. It's the value of experience. And this is a quote from Patton Oswalt. He is a comedian, actor. I think he's best known as the voice of Remy in Ratatouille. Anyways, this is what he says. Ignore anyone who tells you to go for security over experience. Now, my wife, she can attest to this. I've made a lot of career decisions based on what will give me more experience versus what's more secure. And we've had these conversations, are you okay with me doing something a little bit more risky? And, we always agree on that before moving forward. But what we found is that security follows experience, but rarely does experience follow security. Okay, so one example, I quit my perfectly stable 6-figure job in the animation industry to try being an independent artist and make books and do freelance. And that happened over 10 years ago, and it's been a scary, hard, and incredibly bumpy road, but it has been rich with experience. And I can confidently say that I'm a much stronger and more capable version of myself by choosing this path over staying at the day job. Now, I'm not saying that my path is for everyone, but I just bring this up to think about where you're at now. Are you still letting experience be a part of the equation of the decisions that you're making? Or are you choosing security? And regardless of what you're choosing, are you okay with that? Maybe you need security right now. There's nothing wrong with that, but just know what you're sacrificing for that security. Going along with this theme, do you have a career or do you have a life? This is from Werner Herzog talking about career. And he's a filmmaker. He's an actor as well. He's been in a few movies. But here's what he said. I've never planned anything. I haven't had a career at all. I only have a life. It's just a good reminder that the career is just an appendage to your life, and that all the other things you do in your life shouldn't be in the service of your career. Okay? Living a good, fulfilling life is probably the most important thing. So try to make the world, the place you're at, better now than it was when you came to it. Make it better after you leave it. And while you're doing that, while you're trying to make relationships better, the house you're living in better, the community you're a part better, bring your career along for the ride. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is magic. And this is a quote from William Butler Yeats. He says, "The world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper." I like this quote by Yeats. It reminds me of another quote by Jean Giraud, who's also known as Mobius, the French comic artist. And this is what he said: "I'm a nexus of universes. I belong to a class of people. I'm not alone in this, whose hand and eye are antennae, sensitive to a certain type of reality." Every once in a while, my antenna pick up something magical, and I'm able to translate it into something others can understand. Now, my goals in life lately haven't been to have necessarily more experiences like that, and I'm realizing, reading through all these things and talking about this stuff, that's a mistake. You have to leave space or make room in your life for magic to happen. And there's another quote here. This is from Seth Godin that goes right along with this. And so look him up, Seth Godin, if you don't know him already. But this quote, going back to magic, he says, "Most of the time the phrase is, it's time to get back to work. This means it's time to stop being creative, stop dancing with possibility, stop acquiring new insights and inspiration, and go back to the measurable grind instead. Maybe we'd be better off saying, I need to get back to making magic, because that's what we'd actually like to be getting paid to create." All right, I think that's it. I hope you got some inspiration from these last 20 minutes. I want to thank you again for spending some of your attention on this today. And I hope you feel motivated now to go make some of your own magic. That's it. We'll see you next video.